right, listen up, RotoGrinders. It's the ownership report, rotogrinders.com for week number 10 in NFL DFS. My name is Chris Gimino, projected ownership analyst at RotoGrinders, and joining me to go over the action for the upcoming slate of games, Dan Gaspar, Mr. Total 05. Total, running backs are back. They're in fashion again this week. Are you ready to make Sophie's choice at the running back position across all your games on Daily Fantasy Sports?
Yeah, it's I think it's the first week this season, right, where we've actually had two value running backs extremely pop in projections and seem like the absolute slam dunk plays. So I think that makes it a little bit more interesting this week in terms of tournament strategy. I think it's almost more about lineup construction this week, and it is a lot of weeks, but even more so this week, it's about lineup construction as opposed to just the players themselves, I think.
Yeah, it looks like a couple of the daily fantasy sites, namely DraftKings and FanDuel, are making it pretty interesting in the way that you're going to have to choose to construct your lineups a little bit differently on each. Neither one is particularly soft, minus a couple of injury nuggets that we'll talk about here at the running back position that make things a little bit more intriguing. But other than that, everything looks priced up pretty nicely, especially at the quarterback position on DraftKings Total, where we are going to start our conversation as we do each week. As we look at the most popular plays, I have got Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, and Tom Brady at the top of the charts here. I'm having a difficult time finding anyone below that should be in that conversation. And quite frankly, the guys that are close right now, I'm not sure should even be as close as they are. So what are we talking about here? Are we under projecting Prescott, Herbert, and Allen for tournaments? Or do we think that, the general need for diversity will pull up some of these other names below and keep these guys under 15%?
I think you're right. Initially, first glance, it's like Dak is way too cheap for this spot, which is what's driving his ownership. And then we got the running back situation we talked about already, where there's two cheap running backs, which is just going to drive all the ownership to these high-priced guys like you have with Herbert, Allen, and Brady. Allen's the most interesting case to me this week, I think, just because it's like our people are already jumping ship on him. This is the week again. It's very easy to fit him. The matchup's great, but I'll be interested to see where his ownership comes in. Just see if people are off of this Buffalo offense or if they're also afraid of blowout.
Well, certainly it does tend to happen where if a guy's off his game for a couple of weeks, it'll take away some of the luster, even in a matchup against the Jets, who of course will no longer have one of their best defenders on the backside. Marcus May took him out of the wide receiver TB chart this week, as I saw he was on IR, and that just leaves fewer and fewer options to help protect over the top shots against a defense that you'd probably rather throw against anyway. So I do think Josh Allen is a good option for daily fantasy this week. I do think that he has a chance to bounce back in a big way. I certainly don't think Buffalo is going to take that loss very well and may look to step on the gas pedal just a little bit harder. The Jets could be on the wrong side of that coming up here this week. So I do think Josh Allen's good play for tournaments, won't be overly owned, will be popular though. Okay, so Herbert is the guy that against Minnesota, I think I say it, every fostering the potential for big games. Once again, we've got a team that wants to play up tempo. We got a quarterback who wants to throw for and accumulates pretty successfully big yardage. Running back that fits the system well. Boy, I have a tough time finding anything wrong with Herbert this week. I think I'm going to play him. What do you think about? What do you think about this? Is the ownership right? And are you going to be getting on at higher ownership?
I think the ownership's about right. Again, it's the interesting thing between Allen and Herbert, even Brady in there. I guess I'd have no strong read on who's going to pop out of that trio. Again, I think Dak Prescott's going to lead the way. He's got some pretty easy stacking combos, and then it's the kind of high end or high priced quarterbacks. And I have no read on who's going to pop next. I will say I don't think any of them are going to steam so hard that you have to avoid them or anything like that in tournaments. I think we'll see all these guys settle around that 15% range. So fairly high owned for a quarterback, but again, not overly owned. But Herbert, good stacking candidates. I believe Keenan Allen is he's still on the injury report, but I think reports are that he's good to go. Yeah. So he should have a full allotment of weapons. The thing that's interesting for me is Mike Williams' price tag is finally down again, where it seems like just the obvious spot to start taking shots on him again. I know the targets have not been there, but he's down to, I think, 6,900 on FanDuel and 66 on DraftKings. So yeah, definitely interested in Josh Allen, or I mean Justin Herbert with Mike Williams, and then even Jared Cook is really cheap on DraftKings as well.
Whoa. Okay. So maybe we'll get on board with Jared Cook this week. That's good. I don't think he's really actually done anything this year yet, but we know the price tag is getting down there to go right alongside that. So could work out as a stacking partner. Not a lot of, I mean, we'll talk about tight end in a little bit, but the cheap options are going to be pretty concentrated. I don't think he'll fit that bill. Okay, so beyond the four guys, Brady, we'll talk about it a lot more at the wide receiver position. I'm sure of it. When we talk about Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan, Ben Roethlisberger, I mean, I don't even think Roethlisberger deserves to be mentioned with those guys. It's really just Wentz and Ryan who are like kind of the mid-tier price quarterbacks, almost cheap enough to call cheap guys, but the matchups are certainly befitting of someone that we think could get some ownership here. So do you believe that the field will follow the projections and pump them up?
Yeah, I mean, when people love Wentz, people love the matchup against Jaguars. People love Michael Pittman, easy stacking candidate. I think he'll pretty easily be the highest owned guy under 6K or in this price range if you want to include Matt Ryan in there. You mentioned it. You can't play Ben Roethlisberger. I mean, like the guy's, I think 18 DraftKings points is the highest he's posted all season. He just has no upside. He might be able to get you 20. Like this is a theoretically good spot for him. But I would not be, he'll probably come in lower owned. I guess the only way that he might not is people see Chase Claypool's out, right? So we got Deontay Johnson relatively cheap. James Washington's only 3,500. So I think that's the only thing that might drive his ownership up a tiny bit, but you can't play him. And then Heineke is the other guy that stands out here. If you want to pick on the Bucs pass defense, or you think that game's going to be high scoring, Heineke's the guy that I think projects fairly okay for his price from a point per dollar perspective. So he might see some ownership in that sense. But the problem with him on DraftKings is McLaurin's expensive, like really expensive on DraftKings. So you can stack him with Ricky Seals-Jones or something like that. But McLaurin is cheap on FanDuel specifically. So maybe he's more of a FanDuel play, but I never save at quarterback on FanDuel either. So, but yeah, Heineke makes sense, but I don't think he's going to see some crazy high ownership or anything like that.
Right. Skinny stacks for whatever reason, unless you're going to be trying to take shots on Diami Brown or Adam Humphries or some garbage down there at the Washington's second tier wide receiver position. You mentioned Ricky Seals-Jones. He'll be on the menu at tight end. Okay. So if you like this information for RotoGrinders ownership report, please remember to like and subscribe to the podcast. Go ahead and go to the iTunes store and subscribe to the podcast feed, where we've got lots of different NFL informative podcasts out there each and every week. It's something that will do us a favor, but I think honestly you'll be doing yourself a favor, getting some great information pumped to your inbox on the regular. Okay, let's get to the running back position. Let's talk about these injury situations. On DraftKings, I'm going to have projections that are really high for D'Ernest Johnson and Mark Ingram, because all the Browns running backs are out and all the Saints running backs have been slowly going down over the course of the season. Mark Ingram went from a four-way RBBC a couple weeks ago to now he's the only game in town, unless you think Dwayne Washington is something, which I do not. Do you believe that Mark Ingram's ownership will be just behind Ernest Johnson's, where I have it in the stack rankings?
Yeah, and it's honestly the only thing that's keeping D'Ernest Johnson probably from being like 50% owned on this slate. Is Ingram, and I do think D'Ernest Johnson's significantly better option overall, just for the record, and he's going to project that way as well. But yeah, these are the two highest owned running backs. We were talking a little bit before the show that we might have some value open up in New England, but even if that happens, it's still going to be unpredictable. Like even if they have two running backs, that's it. The workload's probably still going to be split between Bolden and JJ Taylor, and they are far inferior options to Johnson and Ingram.
Yep, and I do see that just from a psychological standpoint, it'd be more difficult for people to get this whole other brand new set of options after they've already got two they're very satisfied with in terms of comfortability for cheap running back plays. And then that's not to mention opportunity costs, right? Because you've got just a boatload of amazing running back plays for week number 10 at the high end, starting with Najee Harris, Notorious, and a bunch of other guys tagged up Najee this week for a choice on the RotoGrinders lineup HQ, which you can find on RG Premium. You've also got Jonathan Taylor, Ezekiel Elliott, Eckler, James Conner is suddenly unearthed as a potential top play now that Chase Edmonds is out of the picture, and he had an explosive game last week. You've got DeAndre Swift he's no longer going to have to contend with Williams this week. So and Cordell Patterson, who can forget former kick returner Cordell Patterson just lighting it up each and every week. Suddenly he's an option that we're considering at the top end of daily fantasy, and he's just 6.6 on DraftKings. So with all those things in mind, how on earth are you going to do anything with New England backs once we get that news?
Yeah, you're not. So does that make you want to?
No, that's what I'm trying to say. So okay, so let's talk about though.
But they're going to be 1% owned. Like I could see it. So here's the thing: I would rather take a shot on the guy who's actually going to score his first career touchdown this week, Jacoby Myers.
Yes.
I could see them go a little bit more pass heavy. So I agree. Don't be tempted by those New England backs, but potentially be tempted by like a Jacoby Myers who might just act as like a Cole Beasley de facto running back or something like that.
Okay, so give me out of all those guys. Okay, and let's scratch Najee off the list. Okay, people have heard people talk about Najee all week long on podcasts. We know, we get it. Detroit's bad. He's got all the work, so et cetera and so forth. They don't have a bunch of their wide receivers. But give me the next best guy. Once you plug in, at least one of you probably plug in Johnson. You probably plug in Najee if in like your cash game. But now let's say you're playing a tournament here. You need to fill in that third spot, right? If you're playing it a little bit tighter to the vest at the running back position, give me the guy that you like the best from all the guys I mentioned for your, single entry 3 max type tournaments, where you're trying to play something that's like a pseudo optimal.
What if it's a guy I don't think you mentioned?
Well, I want to hear all about your thoughts, Tuttle. That's what you're here for.
You might have. I might have misheard, but Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, I didn't mention him, and that's actually because I didn't scroll down, quite frankly.
Yeah,
Dalvin Cook is an excellent option.
Yes, he's 8. We have him projected at about 8% projected ownership. I think that's right. Just because of all the guys you mentioned. I love Dalvin Cook this week. Shame he's in the headlines for other things, but it doesn't seem like it's going to affect his playing time. Doesn't seem like it's going to affect anything anytime soon in terms of, his touch count. We've talked about the matchup against the Chargers all season long. They invite teams to run on them. I expect that to be the case again. So we're probably looking at, 20 to 25 touches against a team that has been bad defensively against running backs this season. And so I like him a lot at his projected ownership.
So I've got 2 stats that I cook up each week. Adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. It looks like we're in the green here for Los Angeles here. And then I also have this opponent rush power rating where Los Angeles is actually down at the stone bottom right now from some of the stats that I'm compiling there to calculate that metric. So I'm not sure that they're definitely the best spot in the league for a running back, but they're certainly a good spot. And certainly recently, you're gonna have to come up with another one for the end of the show. That one almost qualified as a low-owned pick because of how many
I had him listed down
here this week.
There's not a ton of low-owned guys available.
Yeah, we might even skip running back during that segment. But let's talk about some of these other guys. So we like Cook, but let's try to make heads or tails of dudes like, I don't know, Jonathan Taylor, James Conner, and I'll give you Zeke as option number 3 here. I know we could name 5 more guys, but out of those guys, how do you piece this together for tournaments? Who's got the most vertical upside, and a guy that you're just a stone afraid to not have in your lineup?
So the guy I'm afraid not to have, and that I probably won't have a ton of shares of, Jonathan Taylor in that matchup. He's an excellent option. There's no doubt about it. He's shown the upside, but I think it's like maybe not this week, but other weeks we've seen game log surfers just drive his ownership up. People love playing Jonathan Taylor. I would not be surprised if he hit over the 20% mark this week. I'm guessing people might get a little bit shy of Zeke, even though the price is right, even though the matchup's right. I could see some ownership fall down on him a little bit. But yeah, Taylor, of the guys you mentioned, is by far the guy that I'm most scared of not having enough exposure to.
Yeah, against Jacksonville, especially. Zeke, though, pretty good matchup here for him against Atlanta. So no fear there. And also you look at there's guys in this price range that sort of pivot away pretty nicely. Swift might not get as much ownership, but still somebody that can tear away selections at 6.8. Patterson at 6.6, and of course scrolling down the list, guys like Aaron Jones, I guess qualify as he's not. I mean, I have him at 12%. Is that a little bit high for him? Like, there's
Yeah.
definitely a lot of choices here. I think he needs to come down.
Yeah, that's high on him. The biggest issue is like the price stands out. So typically we'd be like Aaron Jones, 6,900, slam it. Yeah, but no, he'll be lower owned than that.
Yeah, that makes plenty of sense to me. Okay, so I think the net that we can come out with here is that a lot of rosters are going to have one or maybe two cheap running backs as part of a construction, and you'll probably see a lot of three running back builds come out of the gate this week. Do you think that this presents an opportunity to get different roster construction wise, either by changing the salary makeup by ensuring that you have three expensive running backs in there, or is it just better to just go two running backs and try to do the four wide receiver thing when everyone else is going three running backs?
I kind of like the idea of spending up at running back because I do like some of these options. I mentioned Dalvin Cook already. We didn't really talk about Christian McCaffrey, who is not on the injury report. We're not sure what his workload is going to be at this point in time. If people are skeptical of that, then his ownership is going to be down. So yeah, like if we thought about last year, maybe 2 years ago, of McCaffrey price at 8,400 and even Dalvin Cook price at 8K, like those guys would just be instantly locked into your lineups. So I do like the idea of paying up, and then even throwing DeAndre Swift, who will have some ownership, but another guy that's going to get a lot of opportunity, a lot of receptions. Like I like paying up at running back. And I do think it's interesting this week because yes, like I love Dearness Johnson. I think he's easily the top value play on the slate, but we do have some decent value wide receivers too that we'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, I like paying up at running back to kind of get a little bit different construction.
Yep. So that's again a lot of interesting game theory elements at play here with how many great plays there are at running back. But I think by and large, we should not be avoiding the top end of those plays. It's very, very, very unlikely that you're not going to find two or three of those guys that are capable of delivering the goods in daily fantasy tournaments. Okay. Speaking of guys who can deliver the goods in daily fantasy tournaments, both for DFS and for props, someone like Devontae Adams at 7.9 underpriced on DraftKings is someone that you may see on Thrive Fantasy. You're going to want to go to thrivefantasy.com and prop up today. They've got a game type in which you are going in and picking out a lineup of player props instead of daily fantasy players with salaries. They are, of course, they are assigned based on their likelihood to go over or under, and you're going to take 10 of the 20 available slots and go ahead and plug something in to your Thrive Fantasy lineup. Go ahead and sign up today and get a bonus up to $250 on your deposit. RotoGrinders.com. You can use the promo code Grinders to get that. Otherwise, thrivefantasy.com. Go to the App Store or the iOS store. Sign up and prop up today. Tuttle, Devontae Adams, 7.9. Boy, I think that's going to lead to some high ownership here. I struggle to actually think that Deontay Johnson, who just popped just a little bit higher in my last run, I think that is probably an error. I think it's got to be Adams up top, right?
Yeah, and we got I guess not official. We got semi-official confirmation that Rodgers is expected to play this morning. He has to be activated, I think, relatively soon, which will happen within the next couple hours. Once that's officially official, then yeah, he's easily the highest owned wide receiver on DraftKings at 7,900. That's the price where, like, if Jordan Love were to be quarterback, and again, just lineup construction this week, you're going to have salary to spend at wide receiver 1, and Adams is easily wide receiver 1 this week with Rodgers back.
Was Rodgers out last week? I can't remember if there was any news on this particular situation, but the bottom line is you're saying he's going to be back. So thankfully we all get to see Aaron Rodgers play a game. Okay. So, and certainly for Devontae Adams' sake, because like we mentioned on the show last week, without Aaron Rodgers, you don't have that sort of once once in a I want to say generation, chemistry that you see between special wide receiver, special quarterback, and Adams and Rodgers certainly have that, to the tune of 35% target share and like an absurd percentage of their touchdowns. Yep. Deontay Johnson is another player that gets an absurd rate of targets from a quarterback, even when they had Chase Claypool, even when they had Juju Smith-Schuster, and now we're looking at neither of those guys being available. And then you're waltzing in like James Washington out there to run wind sprints. I mean, it's going to be Deontay Johnson all day getting targets against this Detroit defense. Is it plausible that this guy doesn't get anywhere close to his 18 fantasy point? You know, my contention is that the floor's potentially elevated here in this spot for Johnson, and it's just I don't see how he's going to absolutely ruin a lot of lineups. Is this a mistake?
No, he might get 18 points just off of receptions alone on DraftKings. They're going to pepper him with targets. I mean, this is another reason though to like Najee Harris significantly, which is what we've already talked about. Najee's going to get a lot of targets. Deontay Johnson's going to get a lot of targets. Freiermuth might get even more targets than James Washington, even with Ebron expected back. He's just a very safe, knock on wood that no injuries happen, very safe option this week. Like he gets double-digit targets almost every other week anyways. So yeah, he's a great option.
Yeah, for sure. So you're going to see a lot of him out there. It's going to probably bring down, Keenan Allen looks like a pretty good option on paper, but he's questionable. So I'm almost thinking that despite the great projection, that's a little bit hot on his ownership here. But beyond those couple of guys up top, I think we're really waiting to see what happens with the Buccaneers as far as ownership is concerned, because right now, Chris Godwin, if you left him in there at his current projection, he'd be someone you want to play. Mike Evans right now is someone that you still want to play, but he wouldn't be, getting any kind of top billing in terms of ownership. But you take out Chris Godwin, all of a sudden you've got Mike Evans and you've got Tyler Johnson in the ownership conversation. How are you dealing with this? And do you believe me when I say that, someone like a Tyler Johnson will be high owned if there is no Chris Godwin?
No, he will be. Yeah, Tyler Johnson will be high owned. Mike Evans will creep up right behind Deontay Johnson and Devontae Adams for ownership. And I think it's all rightfully so. This is the spot where Evans, I fade him, and I play Tyler Johnson and Cameron Brate or something like that with my Tom Brady double stacks, and it does not work out. So I'm telling the future right now. But yeah, like Evans would become an excellent play and see high ownership for sure.
Yep. So that's how that's going to look. A little bit different than the way it's displayed on the screen if we don't get those guys. Of course, I think Amari Cooper is going to be your more popular pairing with Dak Prescott, so you'll see ownership on him. I think people want to say, oh, Jerry Jeudy, he's going to be a low-owned option. Well, guess what? Jerry Jeudy was high-owned last week. And the matchup, in particular, not particularly dissuading against Philadelphia. I think he's going to be popular again this week as well. Certainly, and I think that's because, people don't want to play Cole Beasley and Jarvis Landry and some of these other guys that are near his price range. I think Jeudy is going to be ultimately the guy people click on. What do you think of that take?
Yeah, I think that's the right take. Some of these guys that you mentioned that people don't want to play, like they've just been plays every week. They kind of get boring overall. Even Jacoby Myers being one of those guys that has kind of like steadily produced okay results, but no splash results. And that's driving ownership elsewhere to guys that are a little bit more exciting to play in terms of like an upside standpoint or aspect.
I think just once you get past some of these really, really obvious plays near the top, talking about Adams and Johnson, I don't think that there is going to be more than, I'll say half a dozen guys that are really going to be that far over 10%. I mentioned Allen Cooper, Jeudy, I think Michael Pittman, because of people who are going to want to play Wentz, could start to get elevated. And of course, his projection looks pretty good too. I mentioned Landry and Beasley because they're cheap and get a lot of target projection. CeeDee Lamb is going to be fairly popular with Dak Prescott lineups. And then the Buccaneers guys. But beyond that, I mean, who are we talking about here? I think everyone else is going to be pretty low, including A.J. Brown.
Yeah, I agree with that. And CD might even be lower than where we have him. DK Metcalf, somebody I could see just because of the price tag stands out at 6,800. But that game's just going to be so disgusting from a pace standpoint that I don't love it. So one guy I saw really low that's a cheapie that I think might rise in ownership is Michael Gallup. I don't think he'll top that 10% range, but very easy stack candidate with Dak Prescott, who's going to be the highest owned quarterback on the slate. He's 4K, again, one of the better low-priced options. So I don't think he'll hit double digits, but I could see him getting maybe in that like 5 to 10% range.
I think if you give him a 9 fantasy point projection where we had him before I tinkered with it earlier today, I think that's something that could happen. I wasn't real confident that 9 was the right number, just looking at the share that was projected and just him coming back off the injury. But if you did project him that way, I think I would agree with you. I think still a lot to be seen here on this slate. I'll have to take a look at that tonight and make sure that number is accurate as far as where I've got Michael Gallup's projected ownership. Okay, so let's move on and talk about the tight end position. Tight ends are something that's going to play a little bit different on DraftKings than on FanDuel. On DraftKings, I think you're going to probably want to lean in the direction of a cheap option. And if you were playing in the DFS OGs league against notorious Beer Makers fan Head Shopper, you probably want to play a more expensive tight end on FanDuel where that particular contest takes place. Now, if you want to play in the DFS OGs league, go ahead and go to the RotoGrinders homepage, find the link, and sign up and beat their asses. Okay, let's get to the tight ends on DraftKings where we've got the lineup HQ information pulled up, Tuttle. I've got Freiermuth and Arnold as the guys that are going to be fighting for the top billing because they are a little bit cheaper than someone like Pitts, who will be more popular on FanDuel. Do you think that anyone else belongs in the conversation with these two guys as the cheap option du jour on that site?
I do not, but there are like tons and tons of cheap options that are playable. I think this is projected right. I think people will see the Freiermuth primetime 2-touchdown game, want to chase that, and they're not going to get punished for doing that. I don't think this week, even with Ebron back.
Well, they can't all score touchdowns total, right? Like you can't.
Right.
Like, can they all score? Is it going to be Najee, Deontay Johnson, and Freiermuth? Like who's getting thrown off the boat here?
There's like, I just think the target tree is going to be so narrow that a 3,900 tight end is going to be tough to pass up. That's kind of my take. Like even if he doesn't score a touchdown, I could see like 6-7 targets. The matchup's so good as well. I think the biggest threat to that to him hitting is if Najee just goes like they just go and run the ball because they can, and it's 30 carry Najee week, which is certainly possible.
And again, I think that's maybe your risk here to a guy like Freiermuth in tournaments if he's going to be pretty popular. Certainly, Dan Arnold is going to get his looks because I guess it doesn't matter even if they're winning by 3 against one of the best teams in the AFC. And you still saw Dan Arnold show up relatively well last week, 10 fantasy points, 14 the week before. We haven't really seen him even hit anything close to what like a quote unquote ceiling would be for a Jaguars tight end. So at 3,500, I understand completely why he's getting lots of the looks on the popularity side of things. We talked about Jared Cook, and I don't know if we mentioned Ricky Seals-Jones earlier, but certainly he's also cheap. Those are the 4 guys that I think constitute the best 4 cheap plays on the slate. Do you see anybody else that should be in that conversation?
No, I think those are the best. But I did mention briefly earlier, like the Tampa Bay tight ends, Braves running more routes than Howard. I think those guys are worth taking shots on, especially if Godwin's out. Like the targets have to go somewhere, right? So those guys I think will be low owned relative to the other options we already mentioned. So I do like taking shots on those Tampa Bay tight ends.
Yep, that makes some sense. It's not ever something you get excited about. No. I mean, at this point in time, OJ Howard, like, he was supposed to be something one upon a time total, and he hasn't really turned into jack squat. Okay, so Kyle Pitts, I mentioned, going to get contrarian in tournaments, pay up here, or are we just really in need of saving that money for some of these great plays elsewhere?
I'm mostly saving, but I do think this is the position you do want to take, kind of get weird or get different at. We talked about Arnold and Freiermuth being the top 2 owned guys by a fairly wide margin. And like what even is a ceiling game for him? We probably saw it last week with Freiermuth, who then finished with 21 DK points. Obviously, that's very good for his price at the position, but in general, the ceiling is capped here at the position. So I do think it's a really good spot to take shots at. Even TJ Hawkinson, like he's not a fun guy to click on in this matchup against Pittsburgh, but Hawkinson definitely has one of the higher upsides in the spot. Dallas Goedert is another guy that could just get a ton of targets. So I do think it makes sense. This is another spot to try to differentiate your lineup a little bit.
Yep, no one's playing Hawkinson, and everyone wants to play the Steelers, and no one wants to stack the Steelers. No one wants to run it back with anybody on the Steelers. I think Hawkinson certainly not going to be as popular as DeAndre Swift in that regard. So I don't think you're going to see very much of anybody on him. Okay, let's get to defense. Very difficult spot this week because the pricing on DraftKings is a little bit meticulous as usual as far as getting the best plays up into the high price ranges, stratosphere. And I think 4K is the top this week. At the bottom end, there's not really that many exciting options. I have the Cardinals, Titans, Eagles, Browns, Buccaneers sort of checking in here at the top, but everything is like sort of bashed together. So you can start tinkering things one way or another and get things a little bit differently. The Bills, I should have mentioned also in there. They're the 4K defense though. So that's why they're not showing up at the tippy top, despite their great matchup against the Jets. Boy, how you handling defense on DraftKings in tournaments this week? It almost looks like it's going to be one of those, people are going to play how it fits, and they're usually going to gravitate to cheat defenses for that reason.
Yeah, definitely play how it fits. I do think this is the first week where I go and sort by the point per dollar column, and it's just not all defenses under 3K, which is interesting. It is a lot, you just alluded to it or mentioned it. Pricing is a lot different this week on DraftKings at least. And there's just not we've had layups at defense a few weeks where it's just been like this 2.2K defense should not be priced that way. And that's led to extreme chalk. It's going to be spread out for sure this week. And I am a little bit more okay going over that 3K mark than I am on most weeks. If I'm going under, it's probably Titans. But that's probably more of a cash game option because I do think they'll be fairly popular.
I don't think there's a lot of strategy elements at play here as far as how we're playing defense. I don't think the ownership's going to get concise enough on any play to say that there's just a lot of leverage to focus your strategy around it. And I certainly don't think that anything's going to be too congested in one pricing tier to where it's going, say, okay, we'll pay up for defense. Well, no, that not necessarily, because the Cardinals and the Bills will get a little bit of ownership at the very least. And then at the very bottom, you're talking about playing the Jets. And no, well, not for me. I don't know. Maybe you like the Jets. They're 2K, but I just I don't know. Is that going to work out for us?
No, I'm not interested. Like I said, this week is just, I'm trying to sort now by pricing to even see if there's anybody. There wasn't last time I checked anybody below the Titans that I felt comfortable with. That's not to say you can't play any of those defenses, because whatever it's defense, things happen. It might just be a pricing thing that makes it work. But yeah, Titans are about as low as I want to go in cash for sure. In tournaments, if there's something that fits, I guess do it, but it's not exciting at all.
All right, so every week we go through position by position and take a look at the top projected ownership plays. And now we're going to go ahead and circle back to each position again and start talking about some guys who are at the lower end of the ownership spectrum who could potentially be useful in daily fantasy tournaments like the Millionaire Maker or some of these deeper fields where they're necessarily getting somebody off the board can really help you get a great slingshot up the board quite a bit where it might not be necessary to take some of those risks in every tournament that you play. So getting into the quarterback position, we noted that once you get past the first couple of guys, pretty much everyone's in play as a low owned pick. So starting at like the 5% level and below, do you have anybody that you think could have a big game here in this spot?
The guys that I really don't want to tout, but I think you kind of have to at this projected ownership, is the Seattle Green Bay game.
Yeah.
We've seen Green Bay, they don't want to play fast. They don't want to at all. Seattle wants to play conservatively, offensively, and that's like those two things are not a good mix for a lot of points being scored. In the past, we've seen both quarterbacks play efficient enough where pace of play and conservative play calling has not mattered, but it certainly caps their ceiling on a weekly basis. But at this projected ownership, it's like you kind of have to take shots on these guys. Um, like if things, I don't know what would have to happen for there to actually be adequate play calling in this spot. Maybe like a couple DK Metcalf long touchdowns that then puts Green Bay in a weird position, like maybe something like that. But Rodgers at what we have him, I think it was around 2%. Both these guys around 2 to 3% range. It's tough to overlook that.
Yeah. So both of these guys have like comeback narratives, right? Like you've got, maybe Russ. It's less likely that Russ has the freedom to just go out there and do whatever he wants. They'll probably have, some sort of a Pete Carroll boring ass game plan ready to go. So that leaves Rodgers out there with just like he's just such a douche that he'll just like, he'll call audibles to throw it all day long or something. I don't know. Maybe I'm making that up in my head, but I do see if you want to get into actual analysis here, I do think that both of these quarterbacks are of an actual ilk that they potentially put this into the over category of scoring, and that would definitely lead to some congested usage amongst two teams that have fairly congested target share at their wide receiver positions. Perfect for game stacking. Okay, so I just want to mention a couple of other guys. Kyler's question. Well, no one's playing him. Not a great spot, but I think I feel obliged to mention that because Kyler Murray is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and also I will mention this. Probably every other week as well. But Kirk Cousins, number 2 in SIS, world's top quarterback rankings at this point in time, playing very well at the moment. If this game somehow turns into a higher scoring affair, and he somehow finds a way to get those wide receivers back up to where we've seen them go ceiling wise, that could be a great double stack. So there's a couple of guys at the quarterback position. Who do you like at running back?
So running back, we already talked about it. It's kind of hard to find any guys that are playable under the 5% range. Dalvin Cook is a little bit over that. McCaffrey will probably come in a little bit over that if I had to guess. Those are my 2 favorite lower owned high end options. And then the other guys are kind of just like pure conspiracy. Antonio Gibson off a bye, maybe his shin's a little bit better. I know it's something that's not supposed to heal this season or through the course of the season, but maybe he has a bigger workload. It's not a good matchup. But Antonio Gibson was the one that stood out at the price. And then the other one, again, it kind of takes a leap of faith, would be like Jeremy McNichols. Hope that they have to play from behind. He's shown spiked weeks in terms of a receiving back in the past. I do think we'll see them pass a lot more as an offense in general, which we kind of saw, but then we didn't have to see because they jumped into such a big lead against the Rams. So we did see it initially. They did drop back to throw the ball more at the Titans. So McNichols would be like the other guy that's probably not going to really be playing, but I would not be surprised if he had like a 20-point performance.
All right, I'm going to give you Uncle Len real quick. Not too much analysis here. Leverage off of the Bucs passing game spot where they could certainly stomp the Redskins here, and even if they don't, be involved in as a receiving back as well as get the goal line touches. So Uncle Len, if I'm going to go off the board for some of these awesome plays at the top, he might be somebody that fits that bill. Okay, let's get into the wide receiver position.
Yeah, wide receiver. I got a few ugly ones here too. Mike Williams, I've already talked about a little bit. I like him quite a bit with his price tag coming down. He's already shown the spike weeks capable of winning GPPs. I like him. Manny Sanders, I think, is going to be the lowest owned Buffalo receiver, and I like Josh Allen quite a bit. So Manny Sanders, I think, is an okay option. And so at the beginning of the week, I had given you my reasoning for the Tennessee team having to throw more in general, higher pass rate. And I think that's going to happen. I was kind of eyeing up Julio Jones, but thankfully he was added to the injury report, downgraded with a hammy. I think he's officially questionable. But now that he was downgraded late in the week, that I'm not going to be touching him. So at this point, I think I would rather just hope he doesn't play. And then it's like, what do the Titans do at wide receiver 2? So AJ Brown would be an excellent option because he's going to get funneled targets in that situation. Otherwise, like take random shots at Marcus Johnson.
I thought you were going to say that. I was like, oh my God, he's going to say it.
It's bad. It's bad. But like, hey, like I said, the pass rate's going to go up. Again, the better play is
they cut Josh Reynolds. They cut
Josh Reynolds. It's Marcus Johnson and Nick Westbrook there now. So by far the more prudent play, the higher ceiling play is to just play AJ Brown in that spot if Julio doesn't play. Like he's going to get a ton of targets. That's by far the best option. But Marcus Johnson is going to be like under 1% owned. And they have to throw the ball somewhere. So like,
yeah. I mean, I get it. Okay, we're gonna have to cut the show a little bit short here, Tuttle. But I'll just mention Justin Jefferson. Once again, not going to be terribly owned. Same thing with Thielen. So those are guys that again going to be potential leverage off higher owned plays at the position. And then you mentioned the Seattle guys. Maybe Metcalf gets up there, but no one's playing Tyler Lockett, and he's got 30-point game upside always. Okay, let's talk. Give me your best tight end, then we'll get out of here.
I'm just going to keep rolling with the Tampa Bay guys. So Howard would be the higher upside option.
Yep. He's the higher upside option. Brait is certainly the guy that I think more trusted by Tom Brady and Bruce Arians at this moment in time. And they're both pretty cheap. So I'm not going to fault anyone for getting in there. How about Dawson Knox? Well, he's a little expensive. So I'm not going to, let's try to find, if we're going to pay up at the expensive side, Noah Fant at 4.3, I might give him the edge, higher projected, and match up against Philadelphia, and to be a little bit more wide open to the middle of the field. And Fant coming back could be a spot at 4.3, very low ownership if you're trying to get different from the cheapies. Folks, that is going to do it for the ownership report on this fine week 10. I wish you the best of luck in all of your contests. For Dan Gaspar, Mr. Total of 5, I'm Chris Gimino. We'll be back again week 11 in the ownership report. Go win something.